Well, thank you for joining us for this special assisted suicide webinar for those in the northwest of England. I'm Dave Greatrex, Head of Policy and Research here at the Christian Institute. As I'm sure you know, Kim Leadbeater's Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill is currently at committee stage in the House of Commons. And the bill has received a great deal of media coverage in recent weeks, much of it, for which we can give thanks to God, negative. During the committee sessions, many perfectly reasonable amendments have been rejected by the inbuilt committee majority in support of the bill. But all MPs are going to have their chance to reject the bill as a whole in the coming months. And although things can change, our current understanding is that that's very likely to be on Friday, the 25th of April. It's vital that we as Christian constituents keep engaging with MPs. The arguments against the bill are stronger now than ever, not least because the committee scrutiny has not been everything that MPs would have expected. But it's not clear how closely many MPs are following the developments in the committee, so they might be unaware of just how poorly this bill is being handled and how lacking in proper scrutiny the whole process has been. And our senior researcher, Rhys Curnow, will say more about that shortly. We want to equip you to write to, or even better, to go to see your MP in the coming weeks. Whichever way your MP voted at second reading, it is worth getting in touch with them. Yes, there will be those who are so ideologically committed to this issue that they will vote for the bill come what may. But there are many who, even if they're supportive in principle, will or can be given enough concern or doubt about this particular bill to turn against it. I'll say some more about specific North West MPs later, although I'm sure you'll appreciate that we can't be comprehensive in that. But first, I'm delighted to say that we're going to hear from two guest speakers making the case against the bill from their particular expertise. And I hope that these talks will give you ideas for arguments that you can use when you speak to your MP. First, we'll hear from Professor Alan Thomas, a Professor of Old Age Psychiatry, who recently shared his concerns about the bill with us in a webinar similar to this for the North East of England. After we've watched what Alan had to say, our next contributor will be Dr. Gillian Wright. She's a former palliative care practitioner and is now director of Our Duty of Care, an organisation of healthcare professionals opposed to assisted suicide. So over to Alan and then Gillian.
Good evening. So as Dave has said, I'm a Professor of Old Age Psychiatry here at Newcastle University. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and I have worked in the health service for over 30 years, largely caring for people with different mental illnesses and dementia. And so it is on the basis of that expertise that I'd like to make a few important points about this very dangerous bill. This bill is about killing patients at their own request. It, first of all, will destroy doctor-patient relationships. When you see your doctor, you've always had confidence that he or she is there for you, that they wish to find the best treatment to relieve your pain, to help you to breathe better, and so on. But now imagine yourself if this bill has become law and you're in hospital and you're sick and the doctor comes up to you and says to you, now we have this new care pathway and it involves, me giving you some drugs and you taking them and you dying. It's the assisted dying care pathway. You can kill yourself with it. Now that might sound brutal, but this is the brutal reality of the kind of bill that we are looking at. That for the first time there'll be state-sanctioned killing of our patients, and this will destroy doctor-patient relationships. You only need to think of that kind of scenario. The trust you've hitherto had that your doctor was there for you will be shattered when you wonder all the time what their real motivation is. Are they really trying to get you well, or are there other pressures coming upon them to act differently and not in your best interests? Second major concern is then that the medical assessments put forward in this bill are completely unworkable. They require two doctors, supposedly acting independently, a coordinating doctor and an assessing doctor, and each would carry out an assessment. Now, if the person is deemed to meet, whatever it finally is, 6 months to live, 12 months to live, or whatever it is, they will be assessed as to whether they are able to make a free decision to take that choice of assisted suicide. But such an assessment, a mental capacity assessment, requires specialist knowledge. This was illustrated actually at the committee stage when the chief medical officer himself showed that he didn't understand how to do a mental capacity assessment. It's not something that any old doctor can do. We need specialists who are experienced in carrying out these assessments to conduct such assessments properly, thoroughly, and they need sufficient time to do them. You need psychiatrists like myself. Yet we know that not only is the health service buckling under the strain, but that over a quarter of consultant psychiatry positions are currently vacant in this country. So with over a quarter of the workforce absent, as it were, where are we going to find the psychiatrists, the specialists to do these assessments? They simply do not exist. So medical assessments are not workable. They will never be able to be done safely. What we'll end up with would be rushed assessments by people not with the relevant experience to do this vital work. Thirdly, there's a huge danger in this bill, if it becomes law, to the vulnerable in our society, of them being coerced into a decision to opt for this assisted dying, so-called care pathway. Again, this might sound dramatic, but those of us who work with older people, with mentally ill people, with vulnerable people all the time, are conscious of the risk of them being coerced, that is, pressured into taking decisions that really are not their own free decisions, not really what they would like. So when I assess a person to make a diagnosis and to try to work out the right care for them, I don't do that in isolation. I do it as part of a multidisciplinary team. I have nursing colleagues with similar expertise, social workers with relevant expertise, other people, and we together assess the person from our different perspectives over a period of time. And it takes such a sophisticated assessment to be able to detect the coercion of vulnerable people, which is not uncommon, which is often subtle and requires this kind of thorough assessment to be able to detect. And there simply isn't a way in which the two doctors doing this are going to be able to detect and protect vulnerable adults from the risks that this bill poses. If you consider, for example, older people in care homes, running up, as a family might perceive it, huge bills, using up the resources that perhaps relatives would perceive they themselves feel they should have someday. It's not difficult to see how pressure, subtle and perhaps not so subtle, will be brought to bear on the person, the vulnerable adult, to opt for assisted dying for the benefit, as it were, of their family. This bill then is a huge risk to vulnerable older adults. And finally, just to say that the major safeguard we've been told about is not workable at all either. So originally, as many of you will know, then the great safeguard that was placarded was to be a High Court judge. This High Court judge was going to check that everything was done properly. Now that's been chucked out because it was always going to be unworkable, and at the moment it looks like it'll be replaced perhaps by a 3-member panel, including, yes, psychiatrists. And as I've said, there are nowhere near enough of us to do the work. It'll be replaced by social workers on the panel. The British Association of Social Workers says there's simply not enough social workers too with the relevant expertise to staff the panel. So again, this safeguard is completely unworkable. The bill cannot put into practice, or in practice if it becomes law, it will not be able to implement the kind of safeguards something as major as this needs. So there's 4 key points that I'd encourage you to think about, talk to your MP about, write to your MP about. Destroying doctor-patient relationships. The medical assessments are not workable. There's simply far too few experts to carry out these assessments. Vulnerable people are hugely at risk from coercion, which will not be able to be detected. And the final great safeguard, allegedly, of the panel, as it now is also completely unworkable.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this webinar. It's a real pleasure. As Dave mentioned, my name is Gillian Wright. And by background, I was a palliative care doctor. I worked in hospitals and in hospices and in the community. And then I changed to work in a research post in the study of medical ethics. And then I changed again to work on this campaign, which is to try and bring together particularly healthcare professionals, so doctors, nurses, physios, pharmacists, but many others who are concerned about assisted suicide, to bring them together and to help them, give them a voice to express their concerns, like Alan just has, about how this, as an entity, assisted suicide is a seismic shift for medicine, and to impress that upon our MPs. So, just by way of comment, palliative care is very different from what is proposed in terms of assisted dying. Assisted dying or assisted suicide is very much the prescription and administration of lethal drugs, when the person takes a lethal prescription to end their own life themselves. So what is being proposed in this bill is that the doctor would prescribe a lethal medication for the patient to take themselves. And that's very different from palliative care. So palliative care is all about helping people live as best they can for the time that they have left. And that has multiple domains. So it may be physical. So doctors and nurses do try to help with pain and breathlessness, but it's also psychological. So it's important in terms of providing psychological support. It has a social domain. So palliative care social workers are involved in supporting people in their family relationships, perhaps with financial concerns. And there is also spiritual issues about how people are as they face death. So palliative care is all about looking after the whole person and their family as they approach death. And one of the key problems at the moment is that not enough people have access to that care. And Marie Curie estimate that 1 in 4 people don't get access to that care. And we have huge sympathy with those who are desperate and suffering and ask for assisted suicide. But we are really concerned, particularly, as Alan has described, for those who are most vulnerable, for those who might feel a pressure to take their own life, those who might feel a burden on their friends and family. And so generally, palliative care doctors are opposed to assisted suicide. And that's partly because even though they see the most difficult symptoms, they actually have a strategy of how they can help with those symptoms. And so we know across the country that palliative care doctors are really concerned about this bill. We're concerned because of the problems of people not getting access to the care that they need. But also because we see really significant problems in other countries. And one of the most obvious examples of that is Canada. And the Canadian law has expanded extremely quickly. So from the terminal illness model that we are having proposed to us in England and Wales, from that terminal illness, there have been challenges to say, what about those who have a chronic illness? Perhaps their suffering is just as bad as those who have a terminal illness, and actually it will go on for longer. So it is unfair for those people not to be able to access assisted suicide if it is legal for those who have a terminal illness. So this is what happened in Canada. It extended from those with terminal illness to chronic illness within the space of about 5 years. And it actually has also been extended for those who have psychiatric illness, for those who are struggling with very severe depression and schizophrenia. But that was paused because of an international and national outcry. People were so concerned that there was a change, a fundamental change in the approach to suicide. So one of the reasons we're concerned is because we've seen in other countries, such as Canada, the rapid expansion of the law. And we're concerned that that would happen in England and Wales, partly because it is impossible to safeguard narrow law in the way that Alan has described. And we know, for example, in the Netherlands, that there has been extension to those who have dementia, to those who have depression, even to those who are children. We know that babies are euthanized in the Netherlands with chronic and severe disability. So there are real concerns that people might have be pushed or pressurized into taking their own life, partly because they don't have the right care, partly because they might feel a burden, but also we're really concerned because we see the expansion in other countries. But thirdly, we're also concerned because we know that there are actually intrinsic problems with assisted dying itself. So sometimes it's portrayed as a very peaceful and dignified death, but actually there are problems as with any medication. And so the complication rate is about 7%. And these are problems such as the patient perhaps being sick or having seizures, but also the really significant problem of what happens if the patient doesn't die, if the patient is unconscious but doesn't die. What happens then to the doctor? What do they do in that scenario? There was a really interesting response from the Scottish Ambulance Service to the Scottish Bill to say, what do we do in that scenario if we're called and the patient has not died? So this issue affects the patient, their family, but it also affects doctors and nurses. It affects the whole team around the person who is poorly. And it actually affects the whole of society. It affects how we view those who are ill, those who are frail, those who are vulnerable. And we're hugely concerned that this law will undermine or undervalue those who have a chronic and severe disability, and they may feel a pressure to take their own life. We know that about a half of people in Oregon cite feeling a burden as one of the issues why they take their own life and ask for assisted suicide. So I would echo the encouragement that Alan gave you, that please do get involved. Some of you may not have been involved in anything like this before, but actually we have been really encouraged by conversations with MPs and MSPs. Genuinely, many are struggling with this issue. Many find it a difficult issue personally. Many find it a difficult issue ethically. And they appreciate somebody kind coming to speak to them and going through their concerns. And it is a once in a generation time to make a stand on this issue. These are key weeks from now until April, as Dave mentioned. So thank you so much for involving us. And if you are a healthcare professional, please do find our resources with ourdutyofcare.org.uk.
I'm Rhys Curnow, the Christian Institute's senior researcher. I'm sure you all know that the Christian Institute opposes assisted suicide in principle. We're very clear about that, and it's certainly not going to change. It would be wonderful, of course, if all our politicians understood the sanctity of human life made in God's image and therefore opposed assisted suicide on that unshakable, principled basis. But that's not necessary for defeating this particular bill. MPs don't have to oppose assisted suicide in principle. They just need to be uncomfortable enough with this bill to vote against it. At second reading, which is more of a vote on general principles, MPs could argue that they were simply allowing the bill to go forward to facilitate debate and to allow it to have proper scrutiny. And some MPs did say that. But when it comes to the next main vote to third reading, MPs will be voting on the substance of the bill for the final time. And that is their take it or leave it moment. Do they support this particular bill as drafted or not? I want to just cover two key themes that are important to emphasise to MPs over the coming weeks: scrutiny and safeguards, or rather the lack of scrutiny and the lack of safeguards. So firstly, lack of scrutiny. The bill was published less than 3 weeks before second reading, nowhere near enough time for MPs to properly consider it. And then at the second reading debate itself, at least 100 MPs who had indicated their desire to speak weren't able to because of lack of time. Key explanatory documents related to the bill, like an impact assessment and delegated powers memorandum, have not been published. If MPs supported the bill at second reading so that it could be properly scrutinised at committee, then the process has simply not delivered on that expectation. It has been heavily weighted in favour of the bill right from the outset. A large majority of MPs on the committee backed the bill at second reading, including the 2 government ministers on the committee, despite the government officially being neutral. And so votes on amendments at committee stage have mostly been 15-8, almost 2-1. The witnesses who gave oral evidence to the committee were disproportionately in favour of the bill, including all of the international witnesses. When that list of witnesses was being drawn up, the pro-bill majority on the committee rejected the chance to hear from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, only for there to be a U-turn after public outcry. And a group representing disabled people was only added to the list of witnesses at a late stage, again after protest about lack of representation. One striking aspect of the committee sessions taking oral evidence was how often the committee chair had to say that they were short on time, so MPs and witnesses must limit their contributions, even to the point of cutting people off. They squeezed in 50 witnesses in 3 days, regularly having 4 to a panel in sessions limited to 1 hour. And when you factor in time for MPs to ask their questions, there was hardly any time at all to actually hear from individual witnesses. Committee members also said they didn't have enough time to read all the written evidence submitted to them before they started to consider amendments. A series of reasonable amendments have been voted down or withdrawn because it was clear that they wouldn't be supported by the pro-bill majority. Such amendments included attempts to protect vulnerable people from being unduly influenced into choosing assisted suicide, or from doing so because they feel like a burden on others. So far, the fate of an amendment appears to depend on whether or not Kim Leadbeater herself supports it. If she doesn't, then it's voted down by the committee. So this is not meaningful scrutiny. Secondly, let me move on to lack of safeguards. The reality is that there is no safe way to legalise assisted suicide. The international evidence is clear on that. But even on its own terms, the alleged safeguards in this bill are simply not fit for purpose. The final sign-off of an assisted suicide application by a High Court judge was held up as a key safeguard. But this is now being scrapped because judges, the government and others said it would collapse the courts. So what's replacing it? Well, a panel, supposed to include a psychiatrist, a social worker, as well as a lawyer. The British Association of Social Workers has said that the social work sector is already at capacity and that more resources would be needed for social workers to take on any extra work, like sitting on these proposed panels. Senior psychiatrists have raised similar concerns. President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Dr. Lade Smith, warned of workforce shortages in that profession. So it seems as if one unworkable system is being replaced by another. There has been much discussion of the Mental Capacity Act during committee. Some MPs put huge emphasis on it, and it is a key plank of the bill. But it's clear that the Act can't bear the weight. The Royal College of Psychiatrists has said that it is not sufficient. Although the Act is well established in medicine, using it to assess someone's capacity to end their own life is a totally different proposition to, for example, deciding whether someone can consent to refusing medical treatment. One witness called it uncharted territory. Coercion is another key concern. A supporter of the bill, former Supreme Court Judge Lord Sumption, admitted to the committee in oral evidence that even overt coercion is extraordinarily difficult to detect. And he went on to say that the subtle internal pressures that people feel themselves, like not wanting to be a burden, would be practically impossible to detect. He, though, is willing to accept that risk because he's committed to the principle of the bill. In places where assisted suicide is allowed and such information is collected, large percentages of people mention not wanting to be a burden as a reason for choosing to end their lives. Around half of people in Oregon, for example, over the last 10 years. Sadly, some supporters of the bill are quite willing to accept someone feeling a burden as a valid reason for assisted suicide. And in fact, amendments to protect people from choosing assisted suicide because of feeling like a burden were rejected by the committee. The bill is supposed to be limited to those who have a terminal illness, but even that is not as clear as it sounds. For example, Chelsea Roff, who is an eating disorder specialist, believes that the bill could allow someone with anorexia to be approved for assisted suicide. Her research shows that this has happened in other jurisdictions, like Oregon, where eligibility is supposed to be restricted to terminal illness as well. Other conditions not normally thought of as terminal, such as diabetes and arthritis, have also been deemed eligible for assisted suicide in other countries. Sadly, despite hearing evidence on this point, the committee rejected an amendment to stop an eating disorder qualifying someone for assisted suicide under the bill. An amendment to protect those with Down syndrome was similarly rejected, and the committee also voted down proposals to ensure doctors do not suggest assisted suicide to patients, including children. So this lack of scrutiny and lack of safeguards are key points to get over to MPs when you contact them.
Well, thanks to Rhys and also to Alan and Gillian. Well, I'm going to now specifically mention 33 constituencies in the Northwest. I'm going to say why we believe those MPs should be contacted and give some brief ideas for lines to take with them. Now, 33 only covers just under half the constituencies in the region, so I'm sorry not to be comprehensive, but I'm sure you appreciate that we're trying to be targeted in this. Even if your MP is not mentioned, much of what I say will still apply to contacting them, because the key arguments remain the same, those arguments that we've already heard this evening. If you don't know who your MP is, then you can go to our website, the.ci/MP votes, the.ci/MP votes, and you can enter your postcode. So I'm going to start with 8 MPs who actually supported the bill at second reading, but who we believe are or could be open to persuasion. So first, Marcus Campbell-Savers, Labour MP for Penrith and Solway. In advance of second reading, he said that he considered himself a supporter of what he called assisted dying, but said he was also perfectly likely to reject a bill that lacked appropriate safeguards. Those were his words, appropriate safeguards. Then, after voting for the bill at second reading, he admitted to great reservations about his decision. He said that if improvements aren't made, and I continue to feel that vulnerable people are not protected, I will vote down the bill at the next reading. Well, as we've already heard this evening, there's a strong argument that the bill is getting worse, not better, in terms of safeguards. So it's an opportunity to point out that the so-called safeguards in the bill are not worthy of the name. You can say that the much heralded judicial oversight safeguard has been abandoned as unworkable, and its proposed replacement, this panel, has come under heavy criticism from legal figures and also those who are supposed to be on the panel, the psychiatrists and social workers. Turning to Samantha Dixon, Labour MP for Chester North and Neston. Her position before the vote was very non-committal. She didn't give much away about how she intended to vote, and having supported the bill, she said she believes that any change in the law must include strong protections. So what the committee process has shown is that the protections in the bill are completely inadequate, with a whole host of amendments to try to create safeguards rejected by the bill's supporters. So as we've already heard this evening, vulnerable people, including the elderly, the frail, those with eating disorders and so on, are going to be put at risk under this bill. Next, Bill Esterson, Labour MP for Sefton Central. While he voted for the bill at second reading on this occasion, the last time MPs considered this issue in 2015, he actually voted against assisted suicide. He's also said that if the law does change, it's vital that it also includes strong and proper safeguards. So that word again, safeguards, so much is being loaded onto these so-called safeguards. But as Chelsea Roff said, if the safeguards fail even once, then someone dies instead of being given the help and support that they need. So constituents must try to persuade Mr Esterson to go back to his 2015 vote and reject this bill. Next is Sarah Hall, Labour MP for Warrington South. After backing the bill at second reading, she said she was still open to hearing constituents' views and would continue to consider them during the upcoming stages. She said that the question of personal choice helped her make her decision. So it would be helpful to point out that the concerns around mental capacity and coercion that have been mentioned this evening. The danger is that in giving this so-called choice to some, that puts others at risk where their choice might not be genuine. And there's this great difficulty, the impossibility of detecting coercion, as Lord Sumption put it. Moving on, but not very far, to the neighbouring constituency, Warrington North, and Charlotte Nichols, another Labour MP. She has said that her support for the bill at second reading doesn't necessarily translate into supporting it later on. She says she hasn't decided how she'll vote at later stages, but is listening to the arguments, particularly around safeguarding. She acknowledges that this bill would be a seismic change. So again, making the case that so-called safeguards in the bill just don't deliver and are in fact already being watered down. That could be a helpful line to take with her. The same goes for Andrew Snowden, Conservative MP for Fylde. He has said that he too has concerns about safeguards but supports the bill in principle. Remember though, for the purposes of this bill, we don't need to convince him on the principle. He just has to come to see this bill as being the wrong bill at the wrong time because it falls so short in terms of safeguards. Next, Chris Webb, Labour MP for Blackpool South. He said that he voted for the bill at second reading because he believed it deserved to progress to the next stage for further robust scrutiny and debate. But that robust scrutiny just hasn't been happening, as Rhys explained. So Mr Webb said that he would consider his position again when it came to the later stages. He particularly described himself as uncomfortable that the bill allows doctors to suggest assisted suicide to patients. So this isn't something that's being initiated by the patient. It could be, the issue could be raised by the doctor. And he wants that element of the bill changed. And he even tabled an amendment at committee to make that change, but it was rejected by the pro-assisted suicide majority. So there's a clear opportunity to convince Mr Webb that his concerns have not been answered by the bill process and that he should therefore vote against it at third reading. And finally, in this section, Michael Wheeler, Labour MP for Worsley and Eccles. He said that voting for the bill was not an easy decision. He added that it wasn't the end of the process and said his constituents should continue to get in touch. And he also said that any changes in the law must include the strongest possible safeguards to protect vulnerable individuals. A clear chance, again, to point out all the ways in which this bill is seriously lacking such protections. So that's 8 North West MPs who voted in favour of the bill, but who we believe could be influenced to change their vote. Even if they abstain next time, that's better than them voting for it again. They need to feel pressure from their constituents that is informed and well argued. If you're able to secure a meeting with your MP, please do contact us and we'll be very happy to help you further if you would like. Next, I'm going to mention 3 MPs who didn't vote at second reading and so who should be urged to do so next time. As you may know, private members' bills are considered on Fridays when MPs normally expect to be back in their constituencies. But on this issue, constituents need to be clear with their MPs that this is an issue of fundamental importance to them and that therefore they expect them to be in Parliament to vote against it. So these 3 then. So Dan Carden, Labour MP for Liverpool Walton. Before second reading, he said he wanted to engage in the process rather than to decide a hypothetical voting intention at a very early stage. Then, for whatever reason, he didn't vote at second reading. Well, we're no longer at a very early stage. As Rhys said, we're approaching crunch time. So constituents should be contacting Mr Carden, pointing out how flawed this bill is and how flawed the process has been, and urging him to reject the bill. Next, Afzal Khan, Labour MP for Manchester Rusholme. He said before second reading that he had concerns about the bill. He cited the slippery slope, he cited coercion, he cited the current condition of our NHS and justice system. So profound concerns, many of those things we've spoken about this evening, but he was not able to vote at second reading due to commitments in his constituency. So again, constituents need to be urging him to attend and to vote against the bill at third reading. Thirdly, Navendu Mishra, Labour MP for Stockport. Before the vote, he said he hadn't decided how he was going to vote and then he didn't vote at all. But he said he was approaching it seriously. He was committed to considering his constituents' views and informing his position. So again, an opportunity for his constituents to contact him to outline the lack of safeguards and lack of scrutiny relating to this bill and encourage him to vote against it. Finally then, and really very briefly, I'm going to mention 22 MPs who voted the right way at second reading, so they voted against the bill. But we believe they should still be contacted at this time to make sure that they maintain their position and, crucially, to make sure that they attend the next opportunity to vote. As I said, it's going to be a Friday where they expect to be back in their constituencies. But there's no good as winning over any of those 330 who voted for the bill if we're not able to get the 275 who voted against the bill to do so again. So these 22 who are all Labour MPs, unless I say otherwise. David Baines, MP for St Helens North. Elsie Blundell, Hayward and Middleton North. Ian Byrne, Liverpool West Derby. Ashley Dalton, West Lancashire. Mayor Ellis, Ribble Valley. Mark Hendrick, Preston. Patrick Hurley, Southport. Mike Kane, Wythenshawe and Sale East. Rebecca Long Bailey, Salford. Excuse me. Justin Madders, Ellesmere Port and Bromborough. Jim McMahon, Oldham West, Chadderton and Royton. Annalise Midgley, Knowsley. Julie Minns, Carlisle. Tom Morrison, who's Liberal Democrat MP for Cheadle. Matthew Patrick, Wirral West. Yasmin Qureshi, Bolton South and Walkden. Marie Rimmer, St Helens South and Wiston. Michelle Scroggum, Barrow and Furness. Sarah Smith, Hyneburn. Graham Stringer, Blackley and Middleton South, Derek Twigg, Widnes and Halewood, and Paul Waugh, Rochdale. So if you're in any of those seats, please do contact your MP, thanking them again for voting against the bill at second reading and urging them to do the same at third reading. We're currently, as I say, expecting that to be on Friday, the 25th of April. Well, that's the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's been helpful to you. Please do contact your MPs and don't hesitate to get in touch with us if we can help further. And please continue to pray against this bill and for all those who are taking a stand against it. Thank you.